Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
It's very fascinating to me. I read a lot myself. Some people think I'm too intellectual, but I think it's a fabulous way to spend your spare time.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Brian Auten, and I'm here with Chad Gross. Chad, how goes it this week? I know you're wait. I'm not going to ask you. I know how it's going. You're counting the days. As of this recording, we've got less than a week before the movie you've been waiting for, basically since 1985 or something. You've been waiting for this movie forever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in preparation and in storage of the beast. Oh, I'm sorry. In preparation of the film, my girls had not yet seen the first two Ghostbusters. And of course, they watched one and loved it. And we just watched two. And two, when I was growing up, wasn't one that, the 84, the original, was the one that I watched repeatedly. And of course, we quote all the time and such. But we went back and watched two, and I wasn't expecting as much because I know it's an inferior film and it has some flaws. But we actually laughed a lot. My daughter did get in a little trouble, though. Emma, she's 14. She actually said she liked the second one better than the first one because Peter was funnier. And I actually had to correct her and let her know that we don't speak that way in this house. So, there's just no need to try to elevate Ghostbusters 2 above Ghostbusters 1. It's not acceptable behavior. And if you do it again, you lose your phone. Something like that. Right. I'm just kidding. But I did tell her I could not back her, Anyway, I don't think I told my family. I don't remember being this excited for a film in my life ever. So I'm pretty jacked for it, and hopefully it will live up to expectations. And as I sent you, Hugh Jackman dropped a little 1-minute video this week saying that it delivers on every level. He said that he grew up a fan of the director, and he loves the original films, and that this movie delivers on every level and that you've got to see it. So I was super encouraged by that as well. I mean, if Wolverine says it's good, I'm going. Okay.
So today we have a guest on the podcast. We're going to be interviewing Susan Morales. She's the co-founder of the online apologetics book club called Girl Talk Apologetics. So that caught my attention because of the cool format they have of doing an online book study. And then they follow that study up by doing an interactive interview with the author of the apologetics book. For instance, Nancy Pearcey, Sean McDowell, Gary Habermas, Greg Kokel, J. Warner Wallace, all the great resources, book-wise and then author-wise, that if you're part of that book study, you can be on like a Zoom call with them and ask them all kinds of questions. It's super. And of course, there's so much benefit of going through a book with other people and discussing it on a weekly basis. So you can find that at girltalkapologetics.com. You can also find Susan's other channels on her YouTube main page. So if you go to youtube.com/C/Susan Morales, you'll find this main page with 3 channels of hers. So she does, she's a songwriter and a singer. So she and her husband produce music. She's also a homeschooling mom of 2. So she discusses all sorts of homeschooling things on her YouTube channel, The Honest Homeschooler. And then, so there's the Girl Talk Apologetics, Honest Homeschooler, and then her music channel. So those are all great resources to check out. We'll be asking her a little bit about those sorts of things. Should be a great conversation. So let's go to it now.
Let's get ready. Switch me on.
Susan, thanks for joining us for the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We're excited to talk to you about Girl Talk Apologetics. But before we get into that and some other topics, tell us a bit about yourself and maybe a bit about how you became a Christian.
Okay, my name is Susan Morales, and I'm married to my husband of almost 10 years now, Ronald. We love writing and making music, so we're musicians, and we have 2 kids. My daughter Sadie is 7 years old, and my son is Jeremiah, 6 years old. And I pretty much grew up hearing about Jesus from my parents, and I guess they converted to Christianity upon their arriving to this country. They are originally from Mexico. And so I benefited from them, hearing about Jesus here in this country. And so I grew up in church all my life. And I would say I always loved Jesus, but it's taken me even till recently to get to know him more and to grow in my walk with him. So that's how I would describe my coming to know Jesus. It's still happening, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That abiding, right?
Yeah.
So if you grew up in a, churched environment, if you will, how did you become interested in apologetics? Was that something you were taught as a child or discovered as an adult, or what did that look like?
The first time I heard about the word apologetics was in a family friend's home. He attended Biola University, and so he had a bunch of textbooks. And I remember one of those books caught my eye. I just wondered, what does apologetics mean? But I didn't really ask further. And then I would see in certain mom Instagram accounts where they share books. And one of them was the Mama Bear Apologetics book. And it kind of sounded interesting, but at the same time, it was like being a busy mom of 2 babies. It kind of didn't interest me that much, unfortunately, to investigate until I started listening to Mike Winger, because just a few years ago, I became interested in learning more about the Bible. More than what I had learned in my other churches. I felt like I didn't really understand a lot of things in depth. So I started listening to his videos on YouTube, and he would incorporate apologetics in his teachings, which was what I was mostly interested in, was just the teaching, the Bible teaching. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I would kind of zone out when he would start to talk about apologetics because I would just feel like it's unnecessary. Because I didn't really know about apologetics and the purpose and all of that, the application in our life. So one day they decided to have a virtual conference. And so I became interested in just kind of hearing a little bit more of what they're talking about apologetics, what they're doing on YouTube. People in the chat started pointing out that there aren't any women in that virtual conference. So some men were talking about how it's probably because women are not very confrontational. So there aren't a lot of women apologists out there. And I've always been kind of I fight for the women. It's my personality. So I was just kind of in the chat room. I'm like, no, that can't be it. We can be confrontational, when we want to be and things like that. So I started to look into if I could find any women apologists online, and kind of was wondering, well, why is there so few women apologists out there? And so I remembered about that Mama Bear Apologetics book. And I started reading it, and they talked about how it's important as a mom to prepare your kids to think about certain things that they're going to hear about when they're adults, and it could lead them to possibly walk away from their faith. And so I describe myself as reluctantly starting to learn apologetics. And as I started getting interested in the topic, I've just learned to love it more, and I want to just keep reading more about it and continue learning.
Very cool. Now, from your website, you mentioned that you started out to become an elementary school teacher, but then you transitioned to homeschooling. So I want to come back to the apologetics in a minute, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how that works for you as far as your homeschooling, because you even have a YouTube channel for homeschooling. So talk a bit about that aspect of your journey.
Well, I was in Cal State Fullerton. I got my bachelor's there to continue pursuing my credential program so that I could be a public school teacher in California. But I got married right before I decided to not pursue that route anymore. And I always wanted to be a mom. So I got married to my husband, and I decided to pursue becoming a mother. And I still had that passion for teaching. So especially with the coronavirus thing happening, it was exactly the year where we were having to decide, are we going to put our daughter into public school? Or I was always just considering homeschooling. No one in my family or my circle of friends or acquaintances have homeschooled. So I decided to look at some homeschooling moms on YouTube again. And I learned a little bit about how I would go about doing that. And I think it's been very valuable in that it makes me the most influential person in my child's development. Not, some random teacher. And also, like, even if, I would have opted to put them in like private school, a Christian private school, but also like it's nice being able to introduce certain things that I'm not sure they would be introduced to in a Christian school as well. So apologetics has helped me to step away from being afraid of introducing certain things to my kids and to really like get into that uncomfortable situation with my kids and talking through things and learning to think critically about things.
Yeah, that's so important.
I want to come back to the homeschooling thing. So I just want to kind of introduce our listeners to the sort of a couple different aspects of what you're involved with and also your background. So, but then we'll come back to the homeschooling thing because we want to talk a bit about that and how apologetics relates to that. You talked about how you got interested in apologetics, and tell us the story of how Girl Talk Apologetics started and what that is. I know you're the co-founder of that. Can you talk a bit about that? And by the way, if you're listening, you can find that at girltalkapologetics.com.
The co-hosts are Patty Trotty and Anne Sands. And we believe that it was like something that God coordinated that has really resulted into something like we're really thankful for it. And how it happened was we all were watching a YouTube video. So much of my life involves YouTube, I noticed. And it was the YouTube channel Stand to Reason. I had just learned about Stand to Reason, and the guys there, the speakers, I guess, were having one of their book club discussions with the author, Greg Koukl. I've always just liked to ask questions if I'm given the opportunity. How often do you get to ask an author a question like that? So I asked a question having to do with his tactics book. And then Patty, she was next. She asked the question because she had been trying for about a year to gather women on Facebook to discuss books, but the format was more like just commenting on Facebook. And so she shared that she was having a hard time finding women that were interested in reading apologetics books because women were more interested in reading other books. Was her experience. So Greg Koukl gave her advice about perhaps getting with the ladies that asked questions or that were here in the video and maybe starting something. And he said something like, I'm not really sure how you would do it, technically, but if you can find a way to like widen the circle. And so right away, Anne and I messaged her. I think on Facebook, we went and we found her and we're like, yes, I'm interested. I would love to read apologetics books with you. So we kind of did a Zoom conversation that night very quickly, just kind of to see who we are.
Yeah.
So we decided, hey, what if we can invite other women that would also want to join us? And so it was just kind of making a lot of decisions along the way. And we said, okay, well, let's try Zoom, like what we're doing right now. And that has been the story pretty much.
Who are some of your kind of memorable guests? Could you name a couple of your memorable guests and kind of what you took away from them? By the way, we love here on Apologetics 315, we love tactics and have talked about it a great deal. Such a pivotal book. Every Christian should read it. But yeah, can you tell us about some of the guests you've had and maybe some memorable moments?
We've read 6 books and we've been fortunate to have had all of the authors join us for a Q&A. So Greg was the first one and he was so friendly with us. He was so happy to see the women there interested in apologetics because we hear a lot from the authors. Like I remember a time when there was hardly any women in this type of thing. So we had asked him for an hour and he had only gone through 3 questions. And so he's very thorough in his explanations. So
yes,
he decided to stick a little longer. And so that was really memorable. We loved that book in particular because he did we read The Story of Reality and he did such a great job explaining things about the Bible in just one small book. So that was memorable for that reason. I really love that book. So we alternate. So the next book was Cold Case Christianity. And that one just felt with Warner Wallace. That one felt like a college class. It's like, good thing we recorded this so we could go back and hear all his wisdom again. But the one that has been really like just so much laughter was with Mike Lacona and Habermas.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Both of
wow.
them were answering our questions, and it was so much fun. Just the relationship that they have with each other and how they, poke fun at each other. It's just so enjoyable.
Did you read The Case for the Resurrection?
Yeah. I heard a lot about that book, so I'm like, hey, we gotta read this stuff. So then we read The Case for Faith with Lee Strobel, and he was like the most generous. He offered the women scholarships and for the apologetics program at his school. And
Wow.
so that one was like a great opportunity. I think a lot of women took him up on that. He said, just email me and I have scholarships for you.
Well, now, if someone wants to, if maybe there's women listening and they're saying, hey, well, where would I find this? Can I get involved? How many people? How do I sign up? How would you like to direct them? Is there like a limit of how many people can get involved, and what does that look like? Is it like, how many weeks and how frequently do you get together?
So it's on our website, girltalkapologetics.com, or you can email us at girltalkapologetics@gmail.com. We update our information on our website or on our social media. We keep you guys updated on when's the next book. Usually we'll go through 3 to 4 books a year. I mean, we barely have existed for a little over a year now. Last June was our first year anniversary. We do as many books as we can. Sometimes we do special events. So we like to break the books depending on, the kind of book it is, how many chapters. We usually do like 1 chapter a week. We discuss it. We ask questions. It's not too formal. If they don't feel comfortable doing the video thing, they could just listen in, or they can write comments in the chat room. Yeah, so that's pretty much how it looks.
Well, I was curious. You mentioned when you started looking into apologetics and you realized that there weren't that many women. And we have interviewed on the podcast Sarah Interline in the past, and Hillary Morgan Ferrer, of course, the author of Mama Bear Apologetics. I was just curious, once you started meeting other women that were interested in apologetics, this is kind of a common thing that people say is women aren't interested in apologetics, or it's hard to get women interested in apologetics. Is that really the case, or is it that women just don't feel like they have opportunities, or what's really going on there? Does that make sense? Like, kind of how did that, because obviously we've met women who are interested in apologetics, so we don't buy the whole thing that they're not. So what are your thoughts there as far as why does it seem that women are finally beginning to take more of center stage when it comes to apologetics?
I think a whole book could be written on all the various reasons, right?
Yeah.
But like if you think about, I forgot to mention the wonderful Nancy Pearcey. She was the last author. Oh my gosh, she was phenomenal. But for example, her story, she was always asking these questions as a young lady, high school age. So I think I'm not exactly sure how. I forgot what she said, how she got introduced to apologetics. But people like her that are constantly thinking about these things and they go and ask questions. I'm sure women like that are introduced to apologetics much sooner than women that maybe are not pursuing the answers. And they rely more on, what the pastor at church introduces them. I think what I've noticed in our book clubs is that there is a lot of interest, but I think to commit to actually coming and reading a book, that's a little harder. Like the numbers shrink to like half. Usually we have half the turnout of interested women. So I think for some, it seems very intimidating because it was for me. It was like listening to a different language at first when I was starting to, before this book club, I was listening to YouTube channels on apologetics, and it was really hard to understand all of the words, the terminology, the concepts. So I think a lot of women are kind of like, whoa, maybe not my thing. And others, definitely, maybe the majority, I would say, they feel like they just don't have time. It really takes a lot of effort, even as interested as I am now. It really takes a lot of calculating and trying to figure out how much time do I set apart for apologetics and how much time belongs to my kids and other things. So that's a huge factor too.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So tying that into your homeschooling and time for apologetics, time for the kids, how have you found the two to work together? Do you incorporate that into anything you do when the homeschooling or in training your kids with Bible study or that sort of thing? And maybe what suggestions of what has helped you?
I include apologetics during homeschool or just regular talk in the home. My kids ask really hard questions sometimes. Like if something bad happens, my son will say, "Why did God let that happen?" And then I have to think back, okay, how did I hear like on that other YouTube channel, like how did they explain the problem of evil and how sin? And I have to like try to come up with an answer for a 6-year-old, right? Like, no, don't blame God for that necessarily.
Yeah.
But then like when we're reading a textbook or we're reading about science and evolution, it's very common to come across and things like that. Then I have to think, okay, well, how did they explain it in that apologetics book? You know, so whenever it comes up, I'm glad I have those resources, or I can, try to find a book and learn more about that.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I think about how I try to use apologetics in my parenting and talk about certain topics. But then when you try to make something simple, I suppose that one way to know how well you know a subject is how much can you simplify it and still have it be accurate and make sense. And so that's where I really find out, do I really know what I'm talking about? Because, some things are hard to distill down, but at the same time, it's helped me maybe in doing my apologetics, because could I explain this to a young child or a teenager and have it make sense and be interesting and connect with them without using terminology and language or, so sometimes if you want to call it apologetics, isn't giving a whole argument or something, but just introducing a concept. Like the other day, I was just talking to my girls about what it means for something to be objective, and then we talked about something being objectively true. So later, I can use that brick, So I'm not trying to build a house right now. I'm just here. We'll just make a brick tonight, and then later talk about something else. And then now we can have a conversation because I've already kind of built those pieces, so to speak. But
as a homeschool mom who is, like you had talked earlier about the balance that it takes of trying to find time to do the various things and wear the many hats that a homeschool mom has to, what are some of the more challenging things that you find as a homeschooling mom?
Many challenges. Probably the behavior that figuring out how being a teacher and your child being your student and just figuring a lot of things out like that. Like, what are the consequences? Am I doing too much? Are they complaining? Are they saying it's boring because I'm trying to do school the way that I experience school and maybe I need to change certain things? Like the other day, my son said he would like school a little more if there was more science experiments. So just learning to be open about hearing your own kids' input and being flexible, and maybe not tearing yourself down because you might feel like you fail or you're not as good as whatever expectation you have of yourself. And then like looking for the curriculum. There's a lot of curriculum out there, and figuring out which one works for your kids, which one you agree even like theologically, because there are a lot of Christian books out there that maybe you won't agree necessarily. There are some things, for example, like dinosaurs. They come up in books, and so some Christians believe that they were in Noah's Ark. And then, so I remember like, wait a minute, I heard this apologist talking about the two views. So trying to incorporate those things to homeschooling, give my kids, options. Not everyone thinks this way. You guys can decide, it doesn't affect our relationship with God. Maybe also as a spouse, some spouses are more willing to homeschool than others, so having to come in agreement with doing that and finding ways to support each other. Financially, I guess I should say, you can spend a lot of money if you just want to buy all the things, and I guess there's a challenge of trying to figure out how you can best do things without spending too much money.
Yeah. I love how you said there that there are certain questions that, don't necessarily directly affect our relationship with God and that Christians can differ over. And it's a great way to approach it. That's how I do it with my kids on certain topics. I'll say, look, some Christians believe this, some Christians believe this, and some Christians believe this. And here's what I believe. Here's why I believe it, but I could be wrong. And those people that hold that other view, I might find out that I was wrong, so you need to look at each view and you have that, ability to decide which one you think is true or correlates with the facts the most. So what would you say if let's imagine there's a homeschool mom right now and she's listening and she's hearing what you're saying and she's thinking, I agree with this lady. I think that I do need to become more equipped and I want to incorporate apologetics more into even just conversations with my kids, but I have trouble finding time. So I'm wondering, Susan, is there any kind of creative ways you found to kind of steal time and able to do that?
Mm-hmm. So I used to watch a lot of TV, a lot of shows I've had to give up. And I'm constantly looking at my time, how I'm using my time, looking at things I can cut off, trying to figure out, every parent will have their own special situation, their own challenges in their own homes with their own kids. So some moms have it down, they're great at setting a schedule. And from day one, they seem like they figured it out. So maybe I'm speaking more to the mom that hasn't figured it out yet. And so it's constantly trying to find a schedule that will allow for apologetics and for Bible study because they're important, and just realizing, hey, if I really love my kids, I want them, to have a good relationship and prepare them, with God and prepare them for the future. So I need to study these things right now so that I can prepare them and so that I don't have to hopefully find myself in a situation where it's like an emergency. My kid is having a bunch of doubts because of all these things that they heard. And so I want to prepare them ahead of time so that less of a possibility in the future.
Amen.
Now, one of the other things that you can find at susanmorales.org is your blog. So can you talk a bit about your blog and what you write there, what sort of topics you cover?
Yeah, my personal, ministry is learning to follow Jesus in an everyday kind of way. So as I'm walking with the Lord each day, and if I'm tackling something that I want to explore more, then I find blogging about it helpful. And so I have a various list of different topics on there. Anything I feel is relevant to our walk with the Lord.
I've seen a lot of your blog posts as well as your YouTube channel. There's a lot of good content you're putting on Facebook as well. So I want to point our listeners there. So finally, I just want to let you plug your music as well, because you and your husband, Ron, you're musicians and singers. So tell us a little bit about the music and what they can find there. Talk a bit about that.
We like to share music videos on our YouTube channel, Susan and Ron. But lately we've been trying to be more intentional about sharing it on music platforms. So we'll be headed that direction more in the future. And we like to share it on just our social media. So if you follow me on social media, you'll be sure to hear about our music. I'm the person that writes the lyrics, and my husband is the guitar talent, and he's the producer. And so we enjoy doing that for the Lord as well. I think that's another great way to share about Christ, that people might connect with the message in a different and maybe more personal way as well.
All right, very good. Thank you for joining us, Susan, so much. And we're going to point our listeners over to girltalkapologetics.com, where they can find where they can sign up for the book studies and the weekly meetups with the book study. susanmorales.org, where they can find your blog, links to your music, your other resources as well. Thanks so much, Susan, for joining us, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast. We also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. And please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com, along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Auten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.
I always thought owning a vacation home was hard work, from finding guests to just maintaining it. But with Vacasa, they put my vacation home to work for me, caring deeply for my home in every way. Best of all, since switching from my last property manager, Vacasa has been earning us over 20% more. Because it's not just a vacation home, it's a Vacasa home.
Get your free vacation income estimate to see how much your vacation home can earn you. Call 469-529-6347 or visit vacasa.com/20more.
Isn't it time to awaken a journey filled with wonder on a celebrity cruise? Drinks, Wi-Fi, and tips are always included. Plus, book by December 13th to get 50% off your second guest's cruise fare. Visit Celebrity.com, call 1-800-CELEBRITY, or contact your travel advisor. Celebrity Cruises. Journey safe. Journey wonderful. Offer applies to select sailings. Additional restrictions apply. Visit Celebrity.com for details. Ships Registry, Malta.